The Birth of Optima, Greenshore, Chapter 2, Flat Earth. I spontaneously awake while checking if my jaw is still intact with my trembling hands. During the night, I had an intense nightmare which has wreaked havoc in my already unstable mind. My heart beats like mad as I now flip my wrist to check my watch that reads 0222 hours. I continue to lay in my canvas cover with partially warm feet from the heat that's been generated throughout the night. Damn, that awful dream almost felt real, I said as I pinched the skin of my arm. Well, I'm definitely awake. Knowing that it was just a bad dream, I began to control my breathing into a more normalised rhythm and try my best to think back at the beginning of the harrowing nightmare, whilst protectively holding my jaw. My hazy nightmare started with a gun-wielding creeper who had entered into my dream world by smashing through a misty pad of glass. The shards of glass smashed outwardly into large, precise-cut pyramid shapes, forcing me to shield my face from their jagged edges. I then defensively tensed up my arms to gear up for the attack of the creeper, who was no longer there, and watched on as the shards of glass instantly transformed into the weather-beaten binocular scope lenses of my Z4. I then found myself nervously standing on the magnetic platform. My location was much closer to the red zone. I remember observing towards its suburbs through the scopes. The zone's environment was sinfully darker than usual, and its random screams horrifically louder. The Z4 turret screeched as I guided it along its rusty running rail. I then recall barrages of enemy missiles being projected towards our city's walls. The whistling sounds of the ferocious flying shells filled me with dread as they instantly landed within inches of my pit, dramatically exploding. Some parts of the dream were perceived in ultra slow motion, especially the part where I was pulling the Z4's triggers. It was almost like the inner mechanism of the gun was cemented, prohibiting me from firing back. Suddenly my barrels had released its slugs towards the advancing enemy. However, they had impacted the cruds without any effect whatsoever, as the mass of robotic-suited creepers pushed on towards the city's walls. Damn, it was weird. From out of absolutely nowhere, an enemy shell dropped into the hatch of my pit and almost instantly exploded, yet I felt no pain. I was then catapulted, just like a surface-to-air rocket. My body travelled faster than the speed of light as I was propelled towards the mysterious dome. I accelerated through the endless of heavenly clouds at a startling speed. I must say, it was a beautiful feeling as I soared upwards while observing the expansive terrain of Zuntra. I then reached a vacuum of dead space for a moment or two. Without any warning, my body again crashed through the mysterious glass dome, cutting my anatomy to bits. The violent smash created yet more hurtling shards of glass that then followed behind me as I ascended into a strange fluid. I remember gasping for air and closing my eyes as I aerodynamically ripped through it. Flashes of bright emitting light totally engulfed my vision. I then found myself back in the dreaded silo, sprawled out on the dirty, murky ground, also covered in blood and slime. Visually, the pit was just as it was when I had arrived as a rookie. I remember seeing the gold mirror laid perfectly on my slumber. Standing up while brushing loose blooded glass from my shoulder armour, I knelt to retrieve the mirror. I slowly aimed the reflective glass up towards my face to check my reflection, to which I had none. I then began to feel around my face to check for any wounds. Having failed to touch my chin, I frighteningly removed my right hand from my face. My palm was covered in blood and held the fragmented shards of my jawbone. It was truly tormenting to the point that I never want to shut my eyes ever again. I frantically searched for the remaining pieces of jawbone that had been scattered around the pit's surface and then screamed in silence as I began the impossible task of piecing it back together. It really was that vividly awful. Could I still be asleep? Could this be a dream within a dream? It does make one wonder. Tightly gripping the damp canvas cover, I slowly pull it up to my chin for protection, while snuggling up in the fetal position. Yesterday was a proper adrenaline rush. Honestly, did those creepers really think they could stand a chance against the smell of us pitsters? They had not a hope in hell. The bloody cruds. I bet they are getting a good old-fashioned hiding back at their headquarters now. The knuckle-headed fools. I turn onto my back while stretching out my legs as much as I can. Crackling sounds can now be heard instantly, coming from both thigh muscles as I stretch out my toes. My neck feels dodgy too, probably down to the unpleasant draft coming in from every gap of the fudding silo. The temperature in here is becoming quite cold, all down to the moonlight that is now beginning to creep into the silo's hatch. It's an eerie place under the moonlight, with distant sounds of faraway explosions, followed by random coughs of both Scott and Taylor. Distant C-sector sirens billow out from the east side of the inner city, along with muffled laughter from the midnight revellers of the green zone. I now find myself staring up and out of the circular silo hatch. As my mind plunges itself into a mass of distant memories, I stare outwardly towards the bizarre dome and begin to find myself immersed within split-second visual accounts of my once so-called normal life. We had a fantastic, loving upbringing with a mother and 2 siblings, whom I miss and love very dearly. We all lived together in the poverty-stricken red zone called Islington. The district of Islington was a predominantly poor area and had housed many lower-class Zuntran families. For much of my younger years, I lived in a housing estate called the Marquis Estates Projects. The projects were 6 large, high-rise housing blocks. Each of its enormous blocks were connected via footbridges that joined its neighbouring plots to one another. Thinking back, the building was linked together, pretty much like a hexagon in shape. Its urinated stairwells and graffitied walls are all I can remember of it. Well, that and the constant audio of domestic violence. C-sector drug raids perpetually echoed throughout the hallways of the maze-like slum, 24/7. The projects had developed severe sewage problems for much of their existence, to the point that we had been evacuated countless of times. High levels of toxic gas leaked from its fouled underground drainage system that were built by Mr. Quest. Then the dreadful news surfaced. Mr. Quest had hung himself at his mansion within the Blue Zone, unfortunately down to the stressful media slurs that had been aimed at him for just under a decade. The late Mark Quest had sustained heavy financial losses and crippling legal costs, down to his structural blunders at the projects. Hearing this appalling news at such a tender age was so confusing. I mean, how can someone kill themselves? However, I was later to learn that suicide would have a profound effect on my own life. Ourselves, along with the other tenants, had been sent letters regarding future demolition plans from our local council. I remember Mum had read the letter word for word as we eagerly sat and listened in the depressingly lit kitchen. The first stage of the project's demolition was to take place later that year, yet the rehoming programme was going to be ongoing for 4 years because of the high level of occupants within the high-rise buildings. Not only was my residence a disaster, but I had also failed to turn up for my first year in higher education. I became a high school dropout and literally gave up on life, hence my limited vocabulary. I honestly believe it was down to the effects of perpetual war and that constant overwhelming fear of being killed. The negative thoughts majorly knocked my self-confidence and in the end had a dramatic effect on my ability to concentrate in school. As a matter of fact, I pretty much locked myself away for the best part of my younger teens because my exterior world wasn't stable enough. Okay, so I went out occasionally, but I would soon run back home to lock myself away in the safety of the slums. What an existence. It sure was hard. Zuntran troops would use the rooftops of the northern projects as monitoring stations for any surprise Zakatarian paratroopers, who would sometimes get brave. I would often sit there for hours, just watching the troopers participate in military drills. Loud military choppers would frequently land on the rooftops opposite us, which would unfortunately keep us up all night, at times. The harsh reality of the outside world was grim, so lazing around smoking kush was probably the only escape route I had for calming my nerves. Actually, smoking kush was a massive part of my earlier years. Let's not forget my love for slash metal, fever rock, and various other high-octane thrash metal artists, which also helped with the unnecessary death toll of the outside world. I also remember listening to Alex Bones, and sometimes Alan Watt, the two conspiracy talk show hosts. To this very day they still run their very own independent research shows. Alex Bones has a show called The Mind Wars, while Alan's show is called Cutting Through the Dome. What I would give just to be able to listen to an episode of either of the shows right now. I loved listening to the pair of competitive radio hosts. Alan is a bit far out, but he sure was entertaining. Alan Watt was probably the main hype back in the day regarding conspiracy theories. I suppose that's why Scotty Boy keeps babbling on about him. I must say, Alan was a fascinating character. The thing about him was that a lot of what he had said has actually manifested under today's dome. Man, the hours I wasted in that room smoking cannabis kush, with either Alex Bones or Alan Watt doing their thing in the background. It was criminal. Cannabis kush, or kush for short, is the name given to a large budding palm that kicks off a smell like no other. Its unique green leaves consist of 8 separated portions that grow outwardly. Its herb contains natural stimulants that helps with relaxation, obviously when igniting in a tobacco joint or a bong. I vividly remember my 16th birthday. The celebrational day had fell just on par with the news of our rehoming date. To top that off, I had also been given yet more great news. I had been offered a job by our alcoholic bearded neighbour, known as Jason Newland. Damn, I wonder how he is. I haven't seen him in ages. He was a proper cool guy, although he always stunk of booze. The old pisshead. Jason would constantly hum of spirits, to the point that you could smell him in the air and get drunk off the fumes. The job in question was for a company called Elios Corporation. Elios had successfully won many contracts regarding city waste management. The company had brazenly put a bid in for the Marquest estate, which they won hands down. I myself started working for Elios in the summer. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were stationed just off the border of where the red zone joins the circular park, carrying out various operations like cleaning and gardening, etc. It was also around the same time as the Hero mission, formerly known as High Earth Research Observatory. On the lead up to the launch, our nation of Zuntra had been under heavy Zakatarian military assault. Bombs frequently dropped within the not so defensive northern red zone, and many Zakatarian suicide bombers also took advantage of the red zone's defensive weaknesses. To be fair, many of Zuntra's cities were also targeted at the time, creating enormous suspense amongst our entire nation. Against all the odds, our nation went ahead with the mission. The spectacular day was also marked a special Zuntra national holiday, which we all now call the Day of the Hero. The fear of terror attacks, carried out by the Zakatarian fanatics, was courageously pushed aside by every proud Zuntran alike. We as a family also took part in these celebrations, and had organised a party with a few of our fellow Zuntran neighbours. Many dwellers of the projects had also held their very own gatherings too, within the safety of the high-rise blocks. I remember helping my neighbours with the decorations, The bleak narrow hallways of our landings were given some well-deserved life, with the help of some brightly shaped rocket balloons, along with sparkling banners that were decoratively hung throughout the projects and streets. Let's not forget the beers that flowed, and that tranquil scent of kush. Memories. Plumes of kush bellowed out throughout the halls of the slums, and ultimately completed the party celebrations. The drunken residents of the slums loudly gathered around our dirty paint-stained portable monitor and intensely watched its flickering screen. We all witnessed the celebrational build-up of the historical P-2000 rocket and watched in awe as the mighty contraption epically detached itself from its platform. Damn, I remember it blasting off from its birthplace within central Greenshore's black zone. It was fudding magnificent. The view from our dirty crack windows of the projects was amazing too, as it allowed us to see the rocket's propulsion system produce furious flames above central Greenshore. Greenshore's skyline was totally illuminated as the P-2000 propelled itself into the unknown. It was almost as if we had two suns that day. It truly was tremendous to witness. Conspiracy talk show host Alan Watt was at the forefront of the day and presented the whole build-up of the Hero mission live on Channel Z. I must say, he done a magnificent job at it too, because it was almost like he was fulfilling a lifelong ambition of his, to prove to the people of Zuntra that he was right all along. Alan had also played an important role in our earlier national revolution, and had been an important, pivotal player within the patriotic truth movement, in regard to freeing us from our Zakatarian slave masters, who had infiltrated every facet of government. Seeing him in his signature brown suit on the monitor screen was epic, as he had been severely demonised for his outrageous beliefs beforehand. Alan had heroically offered his services to both the President, Zach Steeling, and the many scientists of the Hero mission. The unmanned mission was originally adapted for both scientific and military purposes by recording weather patterns, Earth rotational speeds, gravitational surveys, etc. But more importantly, enemy military installation positions. These interests were then recorded within its highly advanced state-of-the-art 10 million credit scientific research probe, located at the very top of the rocket. Yet nobody, such as myself, was ready for what was about to transpire. According to the earlier Zakatarian Communist Institute of Global Academia, or in short, the old Zakatarian education system, the heliocentric globe model of Earth was believed to have been approximately 25,000 miles in circumference. Well, just a mere 2 hours into the nation of Zuntra's Hero mission, and we were to find it to be nothing but a crock of crud. The P-2000 had managed to pierce through the atmosphere and thrust itself farther through the strange vacuum of space between the atmosphere and the dome. Straight away, Hero's observations had cemented Alan Watt's earlier criticised theories of Earth being totally flat and stationary. The first stage of data eventually reached Zuntra, and within a couple of hours it had shaken the foundations of our once believed communist Zakatarian physics, to the extent that the old Zakatarian library books were being burned all over Zuntra. Compiled data from the Hero's probe was extensive enough. Instead of a spherical Earth curving at 25,000 miles in circumference, the people were to learn that the true Earth had no curve at all. Once the probe detached itself from the top of the main rocket, it then began its own journey across the curveless plane, scanning its measurement sensors back to the static rocket's main satellite. The rocket's advanced technological satellite then sent the visualized grid-like maps of nearly all of our flat Earths, continents, oceans and weather patterns, characteristics back to Zuntra. In much earlier radio shows, broadcasted by Mr. Alan Watt, he had repeatedly explained the Flat Earth conspiracy to his listeners. Alan had also stated that independent experiments had took place well before the Hero mission. These experiments had been carried out by various credible sources. Many Flat Earth researchers, along with spherical globers, tried to scientifically measure natural curve along with rotational spin, yet to no prevail, as they couldn't find any. Inquisitive people, such as Alan Watt, had shot lasers across many large lakes of Zuntra. They originally done this to see if the laser points would rise on large screens that they, the researchers, had placed at the other side of the lakes. The laser points never raised and remained perfectly level, even at whopping distances of over 12 kilometres. This straight away suggested that we were living on a flat surface, long before the Hero mission was ever conjured. After the independent studies, Alan Watt was still criticised and scoffed at by deeply asleep sheep, such as Alex Bones, that just couldn't come to terms with the fact that they were living under a dome. Alex Bones even attacked Alan Watt, both verbally and physically, live on air. It was absolutely embarrassing and disgusting on his part. Don't get me wrong, I do like Alex Bones, but his denial of the flat earth was, and still is, very questionable to this day, especially calling the Hero mission a fake. Over time, flat earth research gained even more popularity and even more new flat earth followers. External scanning devices from Hero's probe had also found that Earth's once believed North Pole to be precisely located at the very centre of the mysterious disk. Oddly enough, that wasn't the end of the bizarre flat Earth. The main probe eventually reached the centre of the disk's dome within a day and elaborately separated its miniature probes, which then clustered outwardly apart towards the disk's outer edges. Over a matter of days, these probes had discovered the characteristics of the South Pole to be very peculiar. Upon further investigations, we had found that the so-called South Pole acts as a conveniently large surrounding ice wall. According to the new Zuntran scientific breakthroughs, the ice wall measures at over 150 feet in height in some places. It is believed that the strange megalithic iced rim helps keep the oceans in, just like that of the surrounding edge of a dinner plate. The smaller probes transferred the second stage data using long-range satellite systems that are mounted to the underside of each probe. They successfully connected to the P2000's mainframe, allowing us to view thousands upon thousands of high-definition real-time pictures of the mysterious circular ice wall. The findings also contain precise measurement tests, along with unedited videos of the mysterious flat Earth. Compiled data scans from Hero were instantly transported back to Zuntra using the rocket's advanced technological satellite system. A defensive weapon system called the Shield was also developed by both Zuntran and Karakian military-industrial corporations. The weapon systems were integrated at the middle section of the P2000 rocket's main body, meaning that should any sabotaging enemy's weapons have been released, then the shield would be able to eject its missiles towards the threat. In 3 near-miss situations, the enemy came close. However, they were soon snuffed out by the shield and its highly effective long-range rockets. The nation of Zuntra, along with its allies, began its best efforts at spreading the news of the flat Earth far and wide. Our Hero mission was now in full swing and despised by our hate-filled enemies. On-ground observations had previously made us all believe that the sun had risen from around the Earth's curve, creating the perception of a horizon. However, the sun doesn't rise at all, and in fact just travels towards us from a distance, getting larger on approach. The reasoning behind our earlier beliefs is down to the limitations of our eyes, as they are unable to perceive objects at extreme distances. Because of our eyes' limitations, they also had us believe that ships sailed over the horizon. However, using high-tech gadgetry, such as the Zuntran-made Zikon 900 camera, the boats would fall back into view when that camera was zoomed in by an observer. Another interesting visual observation that can be made from the ground is the sun's rays. If the sun had been millions and millions of miles away, then surely its rays couldn't have entered the gaps of cloud cover and then burst off at different directions. I mean, surely. they would have travelled in equal straight lines, right? Yet, if one observes the sun's rays, they will see that they are spread out, beaming off at different angles. This also suggested, in earlier scientific ground investigations, that the sun was much closer than we were being told. When you live on a flat disk, it does give an impression of being on a globe, especially with the shape of the moon and distant sun, etc. And I suppose if you travelled around the centre of the disk, it would also no doubt give off the perception of a globe too, down to it being circular in shape. It's natural to automatically assume this, as the heavenly bodies look like spheres too. However, many people question the moon's spherical evidence, such as Alan Watt, who brought up the mysterious issue down to us never being able to see the dark side of the moon. I'll hold my hands up. I sincerely thought Watt and the many other researchers earlier on in my research days to be absolute nutjobs. Once again, just because we had seen the sun and moon as spherical giants in the sky, we had automatically associated our Earth with those shapes. But hey, just because a tennis ball is round, that doesn't mean a tennis court is going to be round. The unmanned probe was a success and had mapped out almost 100% of the disk's geographical landmass within days. More important technical data was also accumulated and sent via stored memory chips within the ejection pods that were located on the main body of the P-2000's rocket. The extremely important third stage military data arrived much later, as Zuntra feared it would have fallen into the hands of Zakataria, or its bloodthirsty allies. We, the Zuntrans, were absolutely brainwashed back in the Zakatarian communist era, and easily led into believing that the Earth was spinning around at 1,000 miles per hour. It's so laughable now, especially the label given to the Zakatarians, who have now been nicknamed the Upside Downers. The bogus globe was like a ball on a chain that had been purposely implanted inside our minds to give us a false perception of reality. Seeing that the P-2000 rocket and Hero probe were specifically designed for a rotational globe, they had done an extraordinary job at adapting to the non-rotational flat stationary plane. The Hero space program had obviously implemented Zakatarian physics within its development regarding propulsion, mobility, aerodynamics, weight, etc. It done this by estimating fuel capacity within its specially designed fuel tanks, and then the overall weight of its fuel payload. The scientists were gobsmacked when they came to learn that the vessels wouldn't need the large amounts of fuel that they had been sent up with. The main rocket itself no longer needed to fight against the negative spin of the bogus spherical Earth. Light stabilization thrusters kept the vessel perfectly stable within the mysterious vacuum of space. Fuel pods on the rocket and probes had pretty much become obsolete, down to the incredible stillness of the mysterious flat Earth, to the point that the rocket only used 2 or 3 fuel pods from its 12 capacity payload, meaning the rocket and the probe still have many in reserve to this day. The space program excelled and was soon to provide yet more news at the rear of the surrounding ice wall. We were to learn later, with the help of its main probe, that the dome transparent glass type material completely covers our disk, just like a snow dome. This is where it gets that little bit spookier. Apparently, the sensors could no longer allow the probe to get closer to the physical dome. The reason behind this was that the sensors had picked up an obstruction, which could have potentially caused a catastrophic disaster. Should our probe have hit the dome, it may have exploded, as it could have cracked the strange glass-like obstruction. What would have happened if it did? More importantly, what could be on the other side? This puzzled the scientists who met to discuss the issues, and over a long period of time opted for the safer option. The probe was now at a halt, brought on by the glass wall it encountered. It left Zuntra's scientists puzzled and its people weirded out. Eventually, mass riots began to erupt as people were taken to the streets within various Zuntran allied nations, our nationals started to burn down old Zuntra temples and other holy Zakatarian sites that still stood across Zuntra. The nation of Zuntra had now entered into the age of information, and unfortunately further destabilisation. Our homegrown nationalists continued their destructive spree and burnt down the Flat Earth Organisation's headquarters, down to them saying that we were living on our turtle's back. The outlandish remarks of the TFEO had angered the people because we had finally put the pieces of the puzzle together through the technological advancements of Hero. We later found out that the TFEO had purposely created the nonsense with the help of undercover Zakatarians, who had tried their best to deceive us with comical interpretations of the flat earth. The TFEO had done a great job scaring folk away from researching the flat earth. However, they paid the price dearly, as many of their members were burned alive within their headquarters, and not one sea sector was there to save the cruds. According to Channel Z news reports, Alex Bones was allegedly seen fleeing the building, which at the time suggested that he was part of the disinformation. Many of Alan Watt's supporters believed that Alex Bones was covertly working with the doomed organisation, yet evidence of this is still very questionable. The Hero probe and the big question of the nature of reality had now become the most looked up subject on the Zuntranet computer search engine. Zakataria had obviously lied about their so-called moon landing, which we already knew to be very questionable beforehand, especially the black, yellow and red Zakatarian flag that had rippled within the zero vacuum of so-called space. Let's not forget the Zakatarians' never-ending supplies of pathetic artistic impressions of their silly cartoon globe, either. Their CGI images would have strange changes to the overall size of continents with every new generated image, causing many people to question the official story. Looking back at it, it was laughable. However, people followed the so-called official story of the spherical Earth to the point that they believed it word for word. The reality had been presented to us by the Zakatarians for many years and was hardly ever questioned, so it was almost as if we had just accepted the lie. We now know that the Zakatarians had produced these horrific lies to keep us away from wanting to explore our exterior dome by introducing an eternally cold universe of nothingness. Yet at the time, the gullible folk, like myself, upside down people, swallowed the bull crud and believed their lies. Previous Zakatarian space programs were now laughed at by the masses worldwide, creating some much needed humour. The only surviving Zakatarian Institute of Academic Science was then later destroyed by rioters within the Blue Zone, creating a ripple effect of further destruction. The Zuntra nationalists were hell-bent on destroying any remnants of the fake foreign pseudoscience. Well, it was understandable, because they, the Zakatarians, had propped up globes in nearly all Zuntran infant and senior schools for decades. For many years, we the Zuntrans had been indoctrinated into the bullcrud, and they, the Zakatarians, had done a magnificent job at it too. The people of the disc were forced to believe that they were upside down at the southernmost hemisphere while spinning around into nothingness at 1,000 miles per hour. Hero had also done an outstanding job at observing the sun and moon's motions. The Zakatarian pseudoscientists had stated within their mainstream academia that the sun was 90 million miles away, although the calculations of the probe estimated both sun and moon to be just outside the dome. Apparently, they are both spinning around the outside, while giving an honest effect of sun and moon changes as they both travel around the strange dome of the disk. This undoubtedly blew the once perceived Zakatarian bogus calculations of the heavenly bodies totally out of the water. It's now understood that the motion of the sun and moon is what had given us the false perception of Earth rotation. According to the probe, Earth is stationary, and the sun and moon are acting like some kind of astrological clock. In other words, the heavenly bodies of both sun and moon are more of a mathematical clock, rather than distant independent spinning bodies. Finally, there is the projected stars that are displayed across the inside of the dome at night. The purpose behind the illusionary universe is still mind-boggling to Zuntran scientists, to the extent that they have not yet touched on the subject. Whatever it is, it's being projected. But from what? Many researchers have said that the thought-to-be distant stars can be seen in front of the moon and sun, suggesting that the universe only exists just to fool us into believing we are in so-called space. As one can imagine, the magnitude of such information would soon create another ripple effect. The news of the illusionary universe went viral via Zuntranet. Distant nations that had also been tied up to the Zakatarian lies broke their paradigm shackles and began to create their very own uprising against worldwide Zakatarian control. Zakataria's Defense Council ordered Zuntra's media transmissions to be blocked within the occupied Zakatarian nations. However, it was too late. The news of the artificial universe travelled like wildfire, to the point that the Zakatarian population started to question their own authoritative elite, with questions such as, what are the Zakatarian authorities hiding? Who do they really serve? What are their overall gains? And more importantly, what's on the outside of the dome? A year after the launch, we were invaded by the scum. The Zakatarian invasion was well timed, as it fell on par with the first anniversary of the Day of the Hero. I was at work at Elios on that terrible day. Myself and my neighbour Jason Newland had been working beneath the Green Zone's underground sewage facility. I obviously didn't witness the morning assault, as I was underground, but I certainly heard the harrowing stories regarding it. One of the many accounts was from a good friend called Mickey McNally. Mickey had told me that the Zakatarian brutes had come down from the sky. According to Zuntran mainstream media, the Zakatarians had used an unknown weapon system to disable our surface-to-air weaponry. Almost 50% of our STARS weapon systems were affected, which had given the Cruds a window of opportunity to attack our capital. Mick told me that he was in the projects when the Zakatarians seized their opportunity. He said that they had parachuted from Zakatarian military planes, in their thousands, right across the northern west side of Greenshore's red zone. He harrowingly mentioned that the sky had turned black, down to the descending paratroopers, who fired wildly towards the running civilians below. Many men and women and children were caught up in clusters of random rounds as they frantically fled towards the protection of the city's walls. Because of the surprise attacks, many rooftop military positions were caught off guard and had little to no effect of fighting back. I recall Mickey bursting into tears from what he had witnessed as he spoke of his terrible ordeal. Mick's a tough nut to crack, so looking at him in a pile of deep-set emotions was hard to take. The poor chap. Mickey had been awoken that morning by blistering rounds shot from machine guns that had been aimed towards his apartment's window, from evil descending paratroopers. Having been alerted to the carnage, he immediately reached for his revolver at the side of his bed, while observing the bullet holes that were implanted within the plasterboarded walls of his bedroom. Mick would often carry a weapon, as he was a member of the Duffy Boy gang. He told me that he left his home in underwear because of the intensity of the attack, as he only had enough time to slip on his sneakers. Reached the ground floor level. Many enemy troopers had already landed and begun setting up heavy machine guns. The trooper whom had shot at Mick while he was in his bed had literally landed near to the south side entrance of the projects. Seeing that the coast was clear, Mick had exited the building and like a raging bull went toe-to-toe with the heavily armoured Crud, who had been too busy setting up his gun upon a tripod. Mick told me that he pounded the head of the Zaka troop with fierce blows because he didn't want to alert the other troops with the unique sound of his revolver. He then dragged the unconscious Fudd inside a bin chamber. It was from there where he stripped the no-good runt of his combat pants, ballistic vest and helmet. Having obtained the items, he then strangled the scum. He also told me that he got an immense buzz from seeing the Zaka trooper gasping for air and ultimately dying. Mick apparently blended in very well with the enemy and witnessed the Zakas making door-to-door executions. I recall him saying that a stampede of fleeing civilians was also being fired upon by camped-out Zakatarian snipers whom were using a shop's window as their vantage point. Mick said that he had peeled himself away from the squadron of Zakas and had managed to gain entry to a furniture shop. Having entered the shop, he was straight away alerted to the sadistic laughter of men, along with female screams that seemed to have been coming from the shop's stockroom. The screams were so intense that they almost overpowered the sound of the gunfire outside. He just had to intervene. He reached the room at the end of the shop and was shocked to find a gang of Zakas wrestling with two women. He said there was a total of 4 Zaka troopers that were intending to carry out a gang rape. One of the brutes pointed to Mick to leave the area while slamming the door in his face. Mick manically scouted the shop for something to buffer the rounds of the revolver, as it may have alerted the Zaka troops outside. He managed to collect 2 cushions and then frantically darted back to the room. He told me that he had to psych himself up upon entering, as he already knew the Zakas were heavily armed. The door violently swung open from a forceful boot that Mick had given the door's handle. This startled the Zakatarians inside, whom were almost ready to rape the 2 women. Having gained their full attention, they all turned to Mick, whilst he clutched at his revolver behind the 2 pillows. Seeing that the men had their pants down to their ankles, he instantly let rip with his rounds and discharged his slugs towards the groins of the murderous rapists with pure fury. He said that the cushions were perfect, as they decreased the sound of his extremely loud gun. The feathers from the buffering pillows exploded within the room and instantly caught on fire. Mick had used all 8 slugs on 3 of the troopers, whom he said were squealing from having their balls blown off. He noticed a 4th crud desperately trying to remove a grenade from his belt that was dropped down to his ankles. He laughingly told me that he had tackled the remaining Zaka to the ground, whilst the women brutally beat the heads off the ballless cruds with their very own K-67 rifle butts. Mick had grasped hold of the crud's private parts as he wrestled him to the ground and twisted them, forcing the scum to comply to his demands. Having helped control the situation within the stockroom, the women then helped Mick to his feet while hugging him. He had managed to unclip the crud's grenade belt as the 4th Zaka laid out on the floor holding his twisted groin, crying. Mick relayed his orders to the ladies and passed each of the women a rifle. He then ordered them to stay inside the room until he returned. Mick said that the ladies had done a splendid job at crushing the Zaka's heads with their rifle butts and spared some time to gaze at their splattered brains. As the Zakatarians in the stockroom bled out from their wounds, he proceeded upwards towards the 2nd floor, with the crippled surviving Zaka as hostage. Having made it out to the hall, he then followed the sound of machine gun fire that was coming from a room at the end of the hall. He told me that he had sighted 2 Zakas, whom had been camped out behind a very large heavy-duty automatic machine gun that had its barrels protruding outside a window. One trooper was feeding the ammo belt, whilst the other indiscriminately fired upon fleeing Zuntran civilians. According to Mick, the sound of the gun was deafening. The injured crud began screaming to alert his pals, while holding his groin in severe agony. However, to no prevail, as the gunfire in the room was far too loud. Mick said that having seen the injured crud trying to signal to the others, he automatically pulled the detonator ring from one of the many grenades attached to the belt. Mick then hurtled the belt towards the devilish thudders. The grenade belt had landed near to the feet of the expected Zakas, and then instantaneously exploded, ripping straight through them. The blast also blew the pair of Zakas straight out the window, in which they had cold-heartedly killed from, and had also knocked both Mick and his prisoner backwards. Lucky enough, the Zakad took the full brunt of the flying shrapnel. The room turned into a fiery inferno, along with the enemy soldier, whom was laid on top of Mick burning. Having knocked out the Zakatarian machine gun's position, it had given the Zuntran troops to safe passage into the border of the red zone. Zuntran soldiers, along with large fleets of grizzly tanks, had managed to push the Zakatarians back towards the northern part of the red zone. Mick was now injured from the 2nd-degree burns that he had sustained from the grenade blast. He walked back to the ladies like a drunkard, because he had also sustained a knock to the back of his head from being blown off his feet. Zuntran troops had successfully secured Camden High Road and began urban warfare with the remaining pockets of Zakatarian fighters, whom had been hiding out within the infiltrated buildings. Mick told me that he remembered making it back to the stockroom door before he was shot multiple times. Burning Zuntran slugs had ripped through his buttocks at a remarkable rate, forcing him to drop to his knees in front of the screaming women in severe agony. The ladies apparently threw their bodies on top of him, while screaming at the Zuntran soldiers not to shoot. Old Mickey sure was lucky. He was then extracted by a military chopper and then taken to the Blue Zone's Braxton Hospital. From there he was given prioritised medical care within its specialised military unit, down to him being under investigation. After many tabloid headlines, Mickey was then given the all clear due to the women's testifying statements of his heroics. He wasn't interested in the glorified status that he had received and instead volunteered as a green helmet to help recover the dead bodies of his fellow Red Zoners. I believe he is still volunteering to this day. Hopefully I'll see Mick again when I'm on my next military break. Surely it should be coming up soon. Damn, I wonder how Jason Newlin is. But more importantly, my sister and brother. Thankfully enough, my sister was and still is a nanny within the Blue Zone, so she was well out of harm's way during the invasion. My older brother Thomas was also fine, as he had secured a delivery job within the perimeter of the Green Zone, just before the onslaught. Although I have since heard from a couple of friends that he is now currently serving just off the coast of Zuntra, on board a military vessel called the Phoenix. I've not seen the pair since Mum's passing, which has been almost 4 years now. It seems that the Zakatarian invasion, along with the untimely death of Mum, had caused a major unbalancing within our family unit. A year after the invasion, both my mother and myself were living amongst our fellow surviving Red Zoners within a highly populated refugee camp. The camp was situated within a heavily militarised fortress at the southernmost tip of the Red Zone. The place was extremely bleak and awfully dull. It had also housed families of military personnel whom had been posted due to the earlier attack. Mum had managed to get a job at the local weapons factory called the Frank Sinclair Military Corporation. She would work 12-hour shifts just to maintain a stable living, along with hundreds of other women. Mum enjoyed the work at the factory, as the people there were like an extended family to her. Although I must admit, she was cut up about not being able to carry on with her dream career as a lawyer, which is probably the only reason I can think of why she would have ended things the way she did. I myself tagged along with the rugged Jason Newlin, whom had searched for some work at the Southern Blue Zone's docks. I remember returning to the overcrowded refugee camp from doing a full shift at the harbour to find Mum unconscious inside our tent from a suspected overdose. It was from there that she was immediately taken to a medical treatment centre by Jason, whom was alerted by her screams. He carried her in his arms in the pouring rain to the nearest medical outpost, where she was pronounced dead on arrival. I remember sitting in the rain, staring into a murky puddle, while trying my best to articulate my thoughts of why she would have committed suicide. Jason also cried, and I still believe to this day that he had hidden feelings for my mum. Later that year, I was persuaded by Jason to join the military. After lots of thought, I eventually did, and now I'm here, down in the stinkhole pit. Why on this flat earth did I listen to him? For fud's sake! My mind runs wild with distant memories of the past, while I lay under my canvas cover. The beans from yesterday's supper have now begun to wage war within my stomach, therefore releasing even more potent gases into the already stagnant air. The smell of past wind from my digesting baked beans is rotten, although strangely enough it has created a sense of warmth and comfort under my canvas cover. I check my wristwatch by pressing the illuminated digital display button. The clock face reads 0545. Fud it. I best get some rest, I said as I set my alarm. I lay my head down upon my pillow and slowly but surely drift off to sleep under the bizarre, mysterious dome.